New York Giants quarterback said his goodbyes in a final press conference with the team. I have takeaways from that. Plus, where did the Giants need to go from here? That's coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, a big welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for making part of your day with us here at the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code Locked On NFL to receive $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, Giants quarterback Daniel Jones spoke to the media about 12 minutes. He spoke to the media today in the field house, basically saying farewell to everybody. He knows that his time is over, reflected on a whole bunch of things. So I'm going to go over some of what he said, give you some of my takeaways. Then in segment 2, how exactly did we get to this point with Daniel Jones? I mean, a quarterback who, when he was drafted, there was so much hope that he might be the guy for the next decade plus, which unfortunately just hasn't worked out. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then in segment 3, what's next for Daniel Jones and the Giants? I have some thoughts about that for you as well. So that's our schedule, if you will, for today. Let's get into it. All right. Daniel Jones basically said his goodbyes to the Giants fan base, to basically the entire organization. It's been a rough week for the young man. And this is a guy who, when it comes to showing his emotions, he's done a pretty good job over the years of keeping his emotions in check. And during his presser today, especially towards the end of it, he started to lose it a little bit. His eyes started to glaze up a little bit. He looked like, he might break into tears. And, look, before I go any further, I just want to say something, because I know somebody out there is going to comment about this. Yes, I have always been, at least, recently, I have said Jones needs to be benched. Yes, I have said, especially this year, Jones needs to be benched, that they need to go in a different direction. I was calling for a quarterback in the draft. Yes, all that is true. At the end of the day, though, Daniel Jones has given everything he possibly had to the team, to the fan base, to his craft, everything he could. It just wasn't enough. And it's unfortunate because, look, you root for guys who come in and they work their tail off. And this kid did. He did all that. And I don't want to hear, oh my God, well, he's getting handsomely paid. He never has to work another day in his life. That's not what it's all about for him. If that's what it was all about for him, he could have taken the money and just ran with it. And he could have just, not busted his tail to come back from the ACL. He could have, been the last one in during the day and the first one out at the end of the day. He wasn't like that. So I just want to, put that out there, that from a human perspective, you wanted the guy to do well. It just didn't happen. So let's talk about some of what he said. A couple of things that jumped out at me, besides the fact that he was very remorseful and willing to acknowledge his role in what has been a very disappointing season for the Giants, is this topic of the injury guarantee. Now, this was always going to be the sticking point if Daniel Jones did not deliver this year. And unfortunately that, it was. And he did acknowledge that, it was brought up in his discussion with Joe Shane and Brian Dable. And it's interesting because he was asked directly, did you consider doing something about that injury guarantee, whether it be eliminating it, whether it be, reducing it, whatever the case may be. Jones did not come right out and say that he did, but by him saying, look, I want to play, I wanted to do whatever I could to play, you kind of, if you read between the lines, you can tell he probably, that topic did come up. Let's put it that way. And at the end, he said, look, my agents dealt with Joe on that. So he didn't want to come right out and say it because I don't think he wanted to throw anybody under the bus. But you kind of got the impression that he did want to, maybe talk about it, that he was open to doing something about that injury guarantee. Not that I think that would have saved him, because look, the flaws are there. We all see the flaws. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that coming up. But Jones, at the end of the day, really wanted to play. And, to that point, at practice on Wednesday and more so today, Thursday, Jones was out there. On Wednesday, it was clear he was the fourth quarterback behind Tim Boyle, who the team just signed earlier in the week. And on Thursday, you saw Jones lining up with the scout team as a safety during the walkthrough period. All right. And look, I'm not heartless, and I hope a lot of you out there aren't heartless as well. I think a lot of you out there who listen to me, you have a heart. They've got to stop with this embarrassing of the kid. All right. It's almost like, look at how far he has fallen to where he goes from being the starting quarterback in the biggest market in the world to now he's running scout team. And I'm not trying to knock those who run scout team, but he's a quarterback. And yet there he was doing as told, without a fuss, without any attitude, lining up as a safety to give, the starting offense a look during the walkthrough period. So, at the end of the day, like I said, Jones, he's done everything asked of him. Unfortunately, this business, it's all about producing. It's all about winning. It's all about, being the best you possibly can be. Jones had flaws coming in when he was drafted back in 2019. Those flaws just kept coming back, and then you throw in the injuries that he had over his career. You throw in, the other factors, which I'll talk about coming up. And at the end of the day, he really didn't have a chance to become the quarterback that he hoped to be. Now, that said, Jones has said his goodbyes. He will get an opportunity. Some team will pick him up. I can't help but wonder if maybe the Jets will make a play for him, because I'm pretty sure the Jets are going to move on from Aaron Rodgers after this year. But, that they've got to sort out their own issues there with their coach and their GM and whatnot. But yeah, Jones saying his goodbye, and part that really got him, I think, was how his, when asked about the support he got from his teammates, how that really meant something to him. And, it was very emotional. And I know somebody asked me, I think it was for my Giants, New York Giants on SI mailbag, how would I compare this situation to that of Eli Manning's benching? And a little different here because, Eli, you knew he was going to be back. There was just such an uproar over Eli's benching. You didn't really see that uproar over Daniel Jones's benching. Certainly not from the alumni and the maybe, basically outside of the locker room. Anybody outside of the locker room, you did not see that uproar that you saw when Eli was benched. So yeah, Daniel Jones giving a farewell. He gave what I think was a really well thought out, really poignant speech at the beginning. Read it from a piece of paper. I'm assuming he wrote it himself. And, again, not a bad guy. He is the type of guy you can root for. It's just, it didn't work out. And coming up, I'm going to explore why exactly it didn't work out. Was he that flawed when he came here? Or, what happened? So we will talk about that coming up next, right after this. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Life gets so busy sometimes that we forget to say thank you to the people in our lives that make it so much better. But there is another person we don't thank enough, ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we are trying our best to make sense out of everything. And in this crazy world, that's not always easy. That's where therapy can help with learning to pace yourself and to cope with all that life throws at you. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedules. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you find that your assigned therapist isn't a match, switch at any time for no additional charge. So don't skip therapy day. Visit betterhelp.com/locked on to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. Hey, Giant fans, if you're looking for those hard to get tickets to shows, concerts, and sporting events, look no further than to Game Time. Game Time makes finding the tickets you want faster and easier than ever, and they offer seats at competitive prices. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. I myself have used Game Time in the past to catch area concerts, and I've been simply amazed at the offerings and the competitive pricing that they have. Game Time takes the guesswork out of ticket buying so that you are left with the seats that you want at reasonable prices. You'll get clear images of your seat views, and you'll also get event cancellation protection. And if you find tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and get the tickets you want. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And this episode is basically an ode to Daniel Jones because, look, whether you liked him, whether you hated him, whether you supported him or you didn't, the guy is still a person at the end of the day. And, you know, I think we all wanted him to succeed. Because if he succeeded, the team succeeded. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So let's take a look at how we kind of got to this point in time. Let's look back. And, look, I've been covering this team since the late 1990s. All right. So I was there for the entire Eli Manning era. I was there for the end of the day, actually going back. I was there for the Dave Brown era. I was there for, every quarterback, basically every quarterback that came after Phil Simms. I just started the end of the Phil Simms era. And the one thing that I always felt the Giants did wrong when it came to Daniel Jones is they did not have a solid support system in place for him when they drafted him. And I've screamed about this for years. And what do I mean by that? When they drafted him, basically the only playmaker they had was Saquon Barkley. All right. He didn't have Odell Beckham Jr. because they had traded him away. His offensive line was not, up to snuff. And I've often made this comparison. I've often said that when you draft a young quarterback, it's much like bringing home a baby from the hospital after giving birth. You want to make sure you have everything you need to make the transition to that young quarterback or that baby as smooth as possible. So it just boggles my mind how the Giants, and I know this is water under the bridge and everything like that, but just again, this for the sake of how we got to this point, it boggles my mind how the Giants just didn't give this kid what he needed to succeed. And then you throw on top of that, every time you change the system because you fire the head coach, you bring in a different offensive coordinator. Look, I understand that Daniel Jones had processing issues at Duke. I understand that. But you would have liked to have thought that if he were able to stay in one system for more than 2 years, especially earlier on in his career, you would have liked to have thought that maybe some of that would have subsided. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, but Pat, he had 3 years in Brian Dable's system and it still existed. Well, yes, he did. He did well in the first year. Then in the second year, the injuries started popping up. And again, we go back to, not having what you need to succeed. And then, of course, this year, just everything fell apart. So, is part of that on Daniel Jones? It absolutely is. The fact that he never really trusted his eyes, what he was seeing, whether he didn't trust his protection or his receivers, whatever the case may be, that's on him. He is not blameless in this. But I think we could probably all agree that the constant uh, coaching changes, coupled with the injuries being in and out of the lineup for most of his career here, that all factored in. And, when he signed the contract, and a lot of you say, well, yeah, he's got the contract. He never has to work again. Folks, originally what the Giants wanted to do there, they wanted to get Saquon signed to a long-term deal and be able to use the franchise tag on Daniel Jones. When Saquon wouldn't play ball with them and Daniel's side was ready to play ball, the plan got flipped. And Shane, as I have said so many times before, was not sold on Daniel Jones after just one great year in 2022. That is why the escape hatch was put in there, making that deal, in essence, a 2-year contract worth just a little bit more than the two franchise tags for the quarterback. So in that respect, the Giants were kind of being fair to Daniel Jones. They were also making it so that if they needed to get out of the deal, which they now do, they could. Okay, so that being said, given that it does look like they are going to exit out of that deal, what would happen if the Giants and Daniel Jones part ways? Well, I'll get into that a little bit in just a little bit in the next segment. But the bottom line is, when you think back to Daniel Jones's career path, and you could say, look, he just wasn't a very good quarterback. He was a backup at best. You could make all that. But here's what I would say about him. He tried. He really tried to make it go of this. And there were games that Daniel Jones, you could sit there and say that he didn't play that badly. But unfortunately, there were more games in which he did play badly enough. And now, going back to the spring, what we saw in Hard Knocks, it was always evident that the Giants were looking to move on from him. And they will say, well, it's because he was coming off the ACL, which, by the way, remember, he's 1 year removed now from the ACL. Sometimes it takes 2 years or more for a guy to really, come back. But all along, you could just tell the Giants were looking to move on from him. Because as I've said before, if you're not looking to move on from him, why are you even thinking about trading up in the draft to get the guy's replacement? Why not just sign a bridge quarterback for a couple of years if that's what you're concerned about? So it was pretty evident to me that the Giants, without saying so, were kind of done with Daniel Jones even before this point. But because things didn't work out the way they had hoped, they figured, okay, we pivot, we get him the receiver, we see if he can make do with it. He's got a better offensive line. And unfortunately, and you can say, well, he also has a new play caller in his ear, but Brian Dable, it's his system. So just a lot went wrong for Daniel Jones, and it's just time he gets a fresh start and see if he can't rebuild his career the way Baker Mayfield, now with the Bucks, has done after he was cast out from Cleveland. All right, coming up next, what is next for the Giants and Daniel Jones? I've got some thoughts about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets. Again, if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to today's Friday edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. And we're ending the week with what was most likely Daniel Jones's final press briefing as a member of the New York Giants. Now, what's next for Daniel Jones and the team? Simply put, folks, I would be absolutely surprised if Daniel Jones is back with this team after this week. You know, he mentioned in his presser that he's still processing everything. He's still giving everything some thought. The assumption now is that, you know, if he is still on the roster for Sunday's game against the Bucks, he will probably be inactive. I don't think they'll even name him the emergency quarterback. I think they will go without an emergency quarterback because of that injury guarantee. So, you know, here's what I think is going to happen and what I think makes sense. I mentioned at the top of the show that, you know, even though he's helping the team by doing what he's asked, it's kind of humiliating in a way to ask this quarterback to go out there and be with the scout team and run, you know, plays like a safety. That's not what he's, you know, what his craft is. So here's the thing. The Giants have Kayvon Thibodeau, whose window they open for to come off of IR. I would not be stunned if come Saturday, the Giants release Daniel Jones and they give his roster spot to Kayvon Thibodeau. And look, you know, Jones is going to get paid either way because he does have his salary is guaranteed this year. Now, some of you are probably saying, okay, so does that mean the Giants don't get any cap savings? That's what it means, folks. Now, the exception is if Jones were to sign with another team, there is some offset language in his contract to where, you know, the Giants can get just a little bit of relief from his guaranteed money, the remaining guaranteed money that's owed, but we're really not talking a lot to move the needle. So what would happen since, you know, if Jones does get released, this would be considered a post June 1st transaction. So, you know, obviously the Giants eat whatever dead money is left. And next year they're going to be on the hook for 22.2, I think it is 22.2 million in dead money. Same as if they were to release him next year. They will get about 19.35 in salary cap savings for next year, which will be a huge help for them. And, you know, look, either way, they were going to rip the bandage off to move on from him because it's just not fair for him. And, you know, I don't want to sit here and get into Daniel's head, but I would think the thing that makes the most sense for him is if he does ask for his release and he gets it, and I think the Giants will give it to him if he asks for it, rather than rush to sign with another team, just take the rest of the year, finish healing, you know, especially any of the bumps and bruises that you have from the season, get your mind right, because, you know, look, this has been, nobody wants to be demoted from their job, and especially when you're in a high profile job with all eyes looking on you. So get your mind right, start training, and get yourself ready for your next opportunity so that come next year, when free agency starts, actually before free agency starts, if he gets a release, he doesn't have to wait for the start of free agency. He can sign with a team right away. So if he signs with a team right away, now he has the most amount of time to potentially get himself ready for his next opportunity and try to make a go of it. So that's what I think is going to happen with Daniel Jones. I just don't see him, as much as he wants to play and he's willing to do what he can to help the team. I just don't think it makes sense for either side to continue on the way they are. You know, some of you might say, well, what about Tommy DeVito? Daniel Jones could be like a mentor to Tommy DeVito. He can, and he has been, but Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito are really tight. So I think in that regard, Drew Lock can continue to mentor Tommy DeVito, who, remember, is in year 2 of this system and a little bit different quarterback, at least from the receivers I spoke to, who told me that more confident, more accurate than he was last year, throws a little bit better ball than he did last year. So there is certainly hope that DeVito can, step in and give them the spark that they so desperately need. But, you know, bottom line, folks, very, very emotional week for the New York Giants. Um, you'd like to think that come Sunday, they come out and they win one for Daniel. But of course, we'll see if, you know, we get more of the same in terms of the quality or lack of quality of football that we've seen for the last, 10 games, or if we get better quality football. But look, in closing, I just want to say this. I've been a critic of Daniel Jones's. I have not liked how he's played. I see his flaws. I've talked about, how they had to bench him. At the end of the day, though, that young man was a true professional. He was always generous with his time. He always, gave thoughtful answers, especially when I interacted with him. He was polite. I remember a couple of years ago, I was mentoring a young writer as part of the Pro Football Writers mentoring program, and he was nice enough to work with us on that project, on her project, for which she got credit for. So, I know a lot of you in the past have said, "Oh, you hate Daniel Jones." I have never hated Daniel Jones. He's a good guy. He's going to do well. He just needs a change of scenery. And, it's unfortunate that things worked out the way they did. But look, I just want to say thank you to Daniel Jones for being a professional, for being courteous, for giving everything you had. It's a shame it wasn't enough, but such is life. These things happen. And I wish you all the best, Daniel. If I know you're not listening to this, but if you are, I wish you all the best in whatever you choose to do next, wherever you go next. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Next week, make sure you tune in. I'll have, of course, the takeaways from Sunday's game against the Tampa Bay Bucks, and we'll just continue onward with our daily coverage here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I will see you on Monday.